And back we are with the next point in the next presentation. Here at Mittelpunkt, this year, Mittelpunkt Digital LARP Conference. It's Johanna from Malmö, Sweden, and she likes to talk about participation design agency. So without further ado, Johanna, it's your space now.
I think we have a video to play. We'll start with that video.
Yeah, okay, we start with the video.
The human brain is very bad at distinguishing between reality and fiction. It does not mean that we don't understand what is reality and fiction, but in the moment when you're experiencing it, the brain has all the same reactions as if it was real. Studies have shown that if you change your physicality, or you put on a costume, or you're given an alibi to behave differently, you change your behavior automatically as a human being. So for example, if you put on a lab coat, you become more decisive and you will become more authoritative in your language and in your body posture. And that happens unconsciously. It's the same thing in LARP. My name is Bianca Peterson. I've been LARPing for more than 20 years and designing for equally as long. LARP stands for live action roleplay, and Nordic LARP is a specific subset where we focus on collaborative storytelling. There's many reasons why people engage in LARP, and for some, of course, it's escapism, but I think the main reason is to be able to step into somebody else's shoes for a while. You get a chance to see how other people function, and when you engage with characters that are profoundly different from you, you will learn that that character is also part of you, and that maybe you can enhance the possibilities you have in your own life of engaging with other people. I think there's a movement toward being more active in stories, and one of the big reasons, of course, that we spend so much time passively consuming stuff on screens. But people want to engage with stories, they want to contribute, and they want to be able to step into these worlds together and share moments with other fans. So in traditional storytelling, you often follow one or several characters. Here, the only character you can engage with directly is your own. So you don't have one main character, you have 100 main characters. All participants need to feel like the hero of their own journey. You have to build trust amongst the participants to be able to play together and to be vulnerable together and tell stories that are serious and fun and dangerous. Because without feeling safe, you can't be brave. And only by being brave, you can allow yourself to play around and be something that you are not. The way I see a LARP is like a big interaction machine. So I create all the cogs in the wheels, and the cogs are the characters, it's the world, it's the morality of the world. But as the players and their input are put into this interaction machine, there will be an output. And that output is each individual has their own story told by themselves, and it is a unique story. So whatever happens is the right thing as long as they adhere to the rules of the world. Then you have to trust your participants to explore the theme that you have set within the given framework, and they will tell way more beautiful stories than you could ever imagine yourself.
My name is Johanna Koljonen, and I am the CEO, back to that, of Participation Design Agency. That's our company that I'm going to talk about today. Thank you for inviting me to Mittelpunkt. I'm so sorry that I couldn't be there in person now that I'm finally able to participate after all these years. You just heard from the creative director, Bianca Peterson, of our company. He founded it in its original Danish iteration, and we moved this company to Sweden 6 years ago, and then we had to change the name for legal reasons. The current name is a multiple pun. Yes, we are obviously an agency, a design agency, but those three words are also what we make. We make design, we make participation, and we make agency, which means the freedom to act in a given situation, right? In the US, PDA is also short for public displays of affection. So that's an additional layer of the joke. I'm married to Bianca, and we have this company together. And also perhaps many of our design works are known for physical touching. I'll get back to that later. My title is CEO because it looks impressive in bios, but really what I'm doing in this company is I am, just like him, a participation designer. Now, in addition to that, I also do I spend about a quarter of my work year in the field of media analysis, and I lecture about the near future of the screen industries in places like Cannes and the Berlin Film Festival and so on. And I'm deeply involved also in strategic development of public film funding in Sweden, and in Europe actually. My background is in radio and TV. I was hosting and I was also producing. And I mention all of this because I want you to know that making LARPs is a choice for me. We heard earlier today a wonderful talk from Bianca Peterson, my old friend. He's a novelist and a screenwriter and quite successful, I think. And I'm not as impressive, but I also have access to other creative fields. I've, for instance, written books and comics. But out of everything I've done in my career, which is a lot because I'm much older than I look, out of all of my work and all of my books, the one that is on the screen by now is by far the most important to me. I'm sorry about the crap resolution if you're on a big screen. I was the main editor of the LARP Design book that came out last year. I wrote a big chunk of it, and I certainly didn't do it alone. More than 60 LARP designers from 10 different countries, including Germany, contributed to this book. You should absolutely buy it. It covers everything in a short 400 pages, everything except how to design statistical simulation systems. If you work with those, you already know how to do that or find other books. In Germany, you can buy this at the Zauberfeder shop. So what do we do at Participation Design Agency? Well, we do a bunch of things. We make educational games for museums and for schools. We had a collaboration actually with the Kennedy Center in the US that put our Romeo and Juliet LARP into US high schools, which was fun. We do some museum exhibition design. We create brand activations, or really IP activations, either LARPs or LARP-like experiences that allow audiences to step into this sort of pre-existing fictional world. That's commercial work, and it's funded or licensed with existing brands. We make we do experience design consulting, in particular with public sector and arts institutions. And our customers range from sort of a sculpture park here in Skåne to the Hummel sports brand, with whom we created a game that got 10,000 people at the Roskilde Music Festival to do constructive and creative interactions with each other. And finally, we make original work, and most visibly our sort of big immersive LARP events where people will come and pay 400 to 800 euros for a 3-day experience. And these LARPs are not just something that we have a business to be able to make. Those LARPs are completely central to all of our business as well, because that is where we learn all of the skills that we use in our non-LARP work. So our pure personal LARP work is not very profitable. We barely break even, sometimes not even that, quite often, in fact, not even that, but that is where all of our R&D happens. And I'll talk a little bit today about how I think about that. But just to remind everyone that LARP is not just surface. I just want to start by showing you this game right here. It's called To the Bitter End. It's a LARP by Bianca Peterson and Lizzie Stark. And these are pictures from the first playtest, which was at the Future of Storytelling Summit in New York. Now that's a sort of very high-powered media festival where it costs literally thousands of dollars to participate, and you could go to our playtest as one of the many things that happens there. And as you can see here, the physical environment is not very suggestive, but it is suggestive enough when what you are playing is two characters who are sitting across a table in a cafe environment. And the character body here and the player body overlap entirely, and your physical actions are largely identical with the character's actions. And importantly, everybody, whether they're role players or not, and most of these people were absolutely not, you already know how to have a slightly uncomfortable conversation at a cafe with someone. So the social scripts, as they're called, are sort of already in place. You don't necessarily know, for instance, how to fight with a sword, so this has a lower threshold for participation, right? And that's where the story starts. Two strangers are waiting for their Tinder dates who don't show up, and then they start talking to each other. And then over an hour, you go on this sort of epic love story that ends in a breakup. So a lot of our players in this playtest had jobs like story lead at Apple or Facebook, or they were working with the big Hollywood studios. And they would typically have zero role-playing experience, which we felt made them the perfect test audience for this. We also run it for role players later, and they like it a lot as well. There's a very short onboarding at the beginning, especially when we do it in groups like this, and that's where we paired up the participants. But the LARP itself is self-facilitated through a card deck, which is a structure with partly with randomized sections. So we were asking here, what can a LARP be when you strip it down to its bare minimum, just to the essential of role-taking and the collective storytelling process? And because it is intended to be playable for people who don't actually have any role-playing experience, it was really important that the game actually teaches you how to role-play. So a lot of these cards are action cards. They describe actions for you to take, for you to do, not like what your character does, but what you do to be able to portray your character. And actions, of course, is how we make emotions and stories in LARP. And you can notice here that a lot of these cues are about the body, because in the Nordic style in which we design, the body is the interface to the character. So roll your eyes at your partner, for instance, is one cue. So I'm happy to say that the playtest was a success. After only 1 hour, a lot of these very high-powered people, sometimes very self-important people, who were media and storytelling executives of different kinds, they were crying at the end of their relationship journeys. Nordic LARP achieved. What they found in this experience most difficult to believe is that they had created these stories themselves, that the stories were so nuanced and that they were so deep. And that is the craft for us here at PDA. As you saw in the video in the beginning, it's this idea of a LARP being an interaction machine. It's an engine that enables every participant to be the artist, or sometimes to feel like they are the artist. But from their perspective, of course, the result is much the same. So the kind of LARP that we work with has two qualities that are super relevant for non-LARP customers today, especially for people who work with some other kind of narrative participation. For instance, VR, immersive theater, certain digital games, some theme parks, and so on. And these are the qualities. Our type of LARP has no performers, or very few performers, which is important if you either want to, especially for scalability, or if you want to have very free interactions. And there is this idea, either the truth or the illusion of full agency, that the participant feels like within the confines of the world and the situation, they are able to do whatever they want. And that doing whatever they want is in fact the thing that will generate the interesting story. And this is a craft. And this is a craft that a lot of fields out there in the world don't know how to do. And you might know how to do this, and this might be, in fact, your job for the next, I would say, decades. Now, Nordic LARP is particularly strong in this field, not because it's somehow better than other kinds of LARP, but because it's formally different, right? So Nordic LARP is typically not systems-based. It's typically not campaign-based. And this means that every LARP has to be redesigned. Every LARP you make as its own thing. You approach it for what it is, something that has its own themes, its own goals, its own budget, and physical parameters and so on. And because we make more designs, we iterate faster, which means we learn faster. And thanks to the annual Mittelpunkt conference and the publishing that's going on around it, the Nordic LARP community started documenting and sharing with each other what we learned very early on. And this meant that additionally sort of made us able to learn exponentially faster. I have been incredibly deeply invested in this field for 25 years, and I'm still learning new things every time I run or make a LARP. This slide also mentions alibi design, and that's one of my favorite contributions that I've been able to make to this field. It's also completely at the heart of PDA's business. I'll return to that in a little bit. But if you're serious about bespoke design, if you're serious about creating the design that is needed for the specific theme, context, situation, specific players, then literally no theme or topic is outside the bounds of what is possible. or appropriate for LARP. Not everything is possible in our situations. Not everything is absolutely not suitable in every situation for every audience. But there's always some LARP, some audience, some situation where things work very well. So what you're seeing here is an actual play photo from the LARP Parliament of Shadows, produced by us with White Wolf. It looks like the European Parliament because it is, in fact, the European Parliament. That is where it was played. This LARP was designed by Bianca Peterson, who worked at the European Parliament at the time, which was key to our access, by Bianca Peterson, and of course, Johanna Peterson, a close collaborator of ours, who worked on all of our vampire work and also ended up becoming a writer on V5. You can see here in the pictures that two actual members of the European Parliament are playing lightly fictionalized versions of themselves. One is a Finnish Social Democrat, one is a German Pirate Party representative, and we are playing in their offices, in real meeting rooms and so on. And this location offered very exciting opportunities, like you can see here, a player hiding in a translator booth to spy on the proceedings. In fact, also occult rituals are possible. Sometimes when you ask permission to make art, especially if you're working in a high security environment, you have to be very careful about your wording in your asking of that permission. And then other parts of this story played out across Brussels, including a cocktail reception on the top of that Arc de Triomphe there. And the budget was paid entirely by the participant fees. I don't think any one of us got paid, but this was just something we wanted to do for the learning experience. I can't remember what it cost, but I want to say something less than 500 euros, probably like that. And the core design question from a sort of World of Darkness narrative perspective was, how do vampires actually influence politics, as we know they supposedly do when they can't go out in the daytime? Like, what on the nitty-gritty day-to-day level, well, how is that done? Through ghouls, of course, and through lobbyists. This is actually a rare action shot by the great Tuomas Puikkonen, the LARP photographer, showing a vampire getting fritzed. Now, on the face of it, this LARP was a really boring LARP. Fundamentally, it's an edu-LARP about political processes. Everything was real. We had the people who were actually staffers prepping political memos in the European Parliament, also prep memos for our players. They were discussing things like visa legislation and blood bank legislation, real issues being debated in the Parliament at that time, just from sort of a vampire's perspective. So the question is, what does it feel like to participate in a piece like this? And what does it feel like to play a LARP like this, especially if all of the actions you're doing are ostensibly super boring? Now, look at these faces, I mean. Look at the very focused Finnish man there on the left. Here, he generously shared with us his heart rate monitor alert matched against the time on the picture. So even when the LARP's topic is policy negotiations, and we made it very clear that if you are not interested in EU policy, you will not enjoy this LARP. So you had to find the right players for, people basically who are policy wonks and vampire players and can afford to go. That was the target audience for this. But it wasn't that many tens of players. It was possible to fill one LARP with exactly that audience, right? So it's really exciting always to live and act and be treated as though your fictional persona is real. Because in full agency storytelling, what you do really matters. Your choices shape the outcome for everyone. And the reason that it works is the social agreement that we're going to stay inside the rules of this fiction. We're going to respect the goals and personality of each character and the rules of the event. And people do respect them. And these are very simple social contracts, but of course they allow us to create real, breathing, physical, alternative realities and magnificent stories, right? And your audience position is inside the body, first-person position, as Mika said earlier today, inside the body of each participant. And this is actually different from most sandbox games in the digital environment and other places, especially those games that have a sort of theme park structure with quests or mods. Also, many LARPs, of course, are like that. Because in a lot of those types of games, the outcomes of the units don't ultimately matter for everybody's story. So the stakes are kind of lower. It can be very fun to be taken on a ride, but I think it lacks often the metaphysical urgency described here. So the character bodies the interface to the fiction, as illustrated by the previous slide. And really what we're saying there is that the player's body is the interface to the character's body. And this is, and through that to their emotions, and the character's emotions become sort of the canvas of the play experience in this type of design. And the fact that the character body, the physical body is the interface is true, I feel, even if the ability of or the visual appearance of the character is different from the player. I still feel that we are using this sort of full body storytelling in a lot of kinds of role-playing, and in particular in LARP. So the second fundamental tenet of Nordic LARP is that everyone is the main character. This actually made us a really interesting partner for White Wolf in their redevelopment of the World of Darkness, which is a role-playing world, as you know, with of enormous power. But in that world has often been played with rule systems that create not only fictional hierarchies, because of course it's a very hierarchical society, especially on the vampire side, but it also makes access to fun inside the LARPs hierarchical, or this often happens. And in addition, the play style has often been very abstract, intellectual, competitive. And again, all of that can be absolutely great, but it's more fitted to certain types of storytelling than other types. And in particular, in that kind of LARP, it's very difficult to tell stories about personal horror, which traditionally has been a sort of key in vampire in particular. So I'll just start this video here in the background. For a few years with White Wolf, we were making licensed LARP work as a part not just of their transmedia development, but also really as part of their IP development process. And the purpose was certainly on one hand activating their super fans, but also to identify ways of telling stories inside that fiction, other stories than before. And importantly, we were also tasked, or we ended up being tasked with the task of bringing different play cultures together, people in the same room with very different ideas of how to play, and see how we could make that work. And in 2017 in Berlin, we produced a global World of Darkness convention, which also hosted a Big Vitas tournament, a chamber LARP competition, and as you see here, some destination LARPs in the Nordic style, which culminated in Enlightenment in Blood, which was played in 11 locations in Friedrichshain. And it allowed these super fans to physically inhabit the World of Darkness for one night. I should say at this point, such props to our amazing team of German NPCs. I learned that day most about how our NPCing cultures are different, but I think we ended up creating something pretty magical, which was pretty much about me telling the German NPCs to not do anything, and them coming back with impulses for things that also created in the end very interesting play. And also great thanks to our genius location scout, Zora Hedrich. Now, if you include physical interactions like in these images, trust among participants is obviously key. And as you perhaps know, the World of Darkness brand has had a history with sort of toxic player communities, where the level of trust between the players, even players who have played together for years and years, has been very, very low indeed. But it's not just about vampire, this is about humans, right? Trusting humans can be really hard. And to be able to participate at all in anything, let alone participate in something potentially scary. And I think LARP is always scary, whether you touch anyone or not. Like, it is terrifying to make that social bit of pretense, or make that interaction offer and see if anybody sort of grabs onto it. That is terrifying. You have to feel certain that you won't be hurt and you won't be humiliated. And there was a big lesson for us in this when we ran the Vampire nightclub LARP End of the Line in New Orleans for American players for the first time. And one of the players afterwards, a woman, she said, "This is the first time in my life when I have felt fully in control of who touches my body." We were just trying to make like a really interesting vampire LARP, that we were trying to create a fun experience of a nightclub that is gradually taken over by vampires, that ends in this blood bath, and everybody's sort of this almost sort of blade like dancing covered in blood at the end. That was what we were aiming for. We didn't set out to design these sort of profound experiences, but because of the nature of the world, I think in this case, you know, we blew someone's mind on a completely different level. It was not the intention at all. And really the way we had achieved it was that we, yes, in all of our designs, we put a lot of thought into how to create a cohesive group of the participants during the very brief time you have with them on location before going into character. I have many other lectures about that if you want to nerd deep into that, or you can just read the book. But also we had some rules in place for them. By our standards, relatively complicated rules for negotiating consent. But because these American vampire players had no experience with that, but they have a ton of experience with really complicated and clunky rule sets, they felt that these rules were very light and sort of easy to use. And basically it comes down to being able to negotiate in a very fluid and easy way, physical consent and story consent. And these are not the same thing. This is really important to understand. So physical consent is what will my body be doing and what will be done to my body. I feel all LARPers in all situations should be allowed to control that. Like you can have a very high pre-negotiated level of consent, but you have to be able to withdraw that because unexpected things can happen, right? And then there's story consent, which is what kinds of narrative situations can I be exposed to or expected to participate in? And also sort of what are the character outcomes if I decide not to participate in those scenes. In some LARPs, it's important to negotiate that as well. You can read about it later. I can post some links. But really, all of this comes back to the term again of alibi design. Like an interaction alibi is the thing that allows you to do what you want to do. Like very basic 1-minute version of this is everything we do in life every day happens in overlays of physical environments and social environments. And what is permitted for different people at different situations, and even different people in the same room at the same time, is connected by a lot of things. Like that lady who felt that she has never been in a nightclub environment. She has never felt safe in a nightclub environment because she can never be sure who touches her body. Her agency in the real world is different from perhaps a really large, strong and terrifying looking man in a nightclub environment. Their experiences will be different. That's because of the social environment. And you can do things. So you can design the social environment and the physical environment to change what is possible at any given time for different people. And it's possible to nerd into this very deeply. I want to tell you already, you know how to do this because as a human, you participate in these kinds of situations every waking moment of your day. This is a process that is about becoming aware of it and correcting things on purpose to enable whatever it is you want your participants to do in your LARP. An alibi can be a mask, a permission, a rule, an instruction. And those are like a mask, of course, is a way to change the physical environment, but that in itself changes the social environment. If you have a party and you turned on the lights, it's less scary for people to dance on the dance floor. Change the physical environment, it has an effect in the social environment. But it could be a LARP rule to say that in this fiction, the shortest people have the highest status. And when everybody starts behaving as though that's true, boom, something completely different has happened in the social space. Now, this craft is very much at the heart of a lot of our signature LARPs. This one is called Inside Hamlet. It's produced in the Renaissance castle of Elsinore, in Elsinore, Denmark. So where the place where Shakespeare also set his original play. It's played in a pretty physical style. It's a relatively well-known LARP and it's very well documented. So I'm actually not going to go into it very much now. What happens in this LARP is that the collective, everybody is kind of, all of the participants are playing the court of Claudius in the last day of this sort of dictator's bunker, essentially, in this sort of 1930s type environment. And you go on this very dark journey, which is essentially Hamlet's journey for every character, where the first act is themed decadence, the second act is themed deception, and the third act is themed death. And there are some game design things that are happening. So for instance, the interaction rules, also some game mechanics are different in the different acts to create different kinds of story effects and to encourage or discourage the kind of behaviors that support the journey, the emotional arc that we want all the participants to go on. So again, even though they have full agency. They feel like they can do anything in the room, and indeed their characters can, as long as it's somewhat logical to the character, they can do that thing. But the machine will produce the narrative experience to them that we promise. Now, it's a pretty dark journey. It's a Shakespeare tragedy, and everybody dies at the end. So a lot of how to enable that kind of participation, a lot of it is about the expectation management. And if you now react to this, you're like, I don't want to do that. Like, I do not want to put on a corset or be in a room where people look like a burlesque party and do God knows what. You wouldn't do that. Like, if you don't want to do that, you wouldn't. On the website, it says like this: the LARP is played in a very physical style where dancing is dancing and fighting looks real. Real alcohol will be served, but players deemed too intoxicated to participate responsibly will be removed from play, etc., etc. All genders, sexualities, and bodies are invited to act wicked and be beautiful at this LARP. During play, you're likely to become witness to nudity, public displays of affection and sexuality, or simulated but realistic-looking sex violence or drug taking, etc., etc. But whether gentle intimacy, portrayed lust, or pretended violence, you will always have full control of your own body and of the story you are telling. So essentially, we are saying you have to be okay to be in rooms where all this is happening, but we promise you that you will have story consent and physical consent. And we have mechanics that are profoundly tested to enable that. And we feel like we do. Now, this is not a LARP for all players, but you would be surprised because we get a fair amount of Shakespeare superfans who come because they can live this story at this location. When we ran this LARP at Elsinore for the first time, you know, they have like summer theater in the yard, but we were the first time for over 100 years when Hamlet had been performed inside the castle. And being part of that, of course, is amazing, especially for the players, because they are also player characters who get to play Hamlet, Claudius, etc., the characters from the play. They have to come earlier and learn some lines because they have to hit the story beats, but they are also paid participants like everybody else. So people are so invested, and people come not just for this experience, but for other reasons. And they say, well, I'm just going to come for the story. I'm not going to participate in any of this. But because of the design and because of how safe they end up feeling, a lot of people are surprising themselves with what aspects of fun and what aspects of comfort they end up experiencing and permitting themselves. And also people who thought, oh, like this is a little bit like hot and interesting. Oh no, they ended up not interacting with that at all because they were so deep in some kind of family tragedy or something along those lines. Yeah. The great LARP theorist Eric Fatland said the following words: LARP is a society inside a society inside a society. And I've tried to elide this like this. LARP is a fictional society inside a temporary society inside a continuous society. And of course, this is also a simplification. But what it means is that when we LARP, we create a fictional society that has real social relationships, right? We play characters, but we also play roles. I don't know, I can't remember now if the German terms are similar, right? But a social role is things like king or subject, sister, brother, sibling, mother, spouse, classmate. All of these are social roles. Like these are functions in a social web that come with agency, right? And then we have character, which is about things like biography and goals and personality and priorities and values. And when we LARP, we play characters who portray different roles in different situations. And that whole web is the fictional society. And that's inside a temporary society, which is the temporary society of the players at that particular LARP. And they also have a society. And they're going to bring a lot of their existing culture and norms and priorities and all of that. And preconceptions about what LARP is and how to interact with humans. They're going to bring a lot of that into the LARP as well. And if you don't design the temporary society, if you don't put a lot of effort into thinking, what is the tone? How do I speak to these speakers, these participants? How do we speak to each other? What are the ways in which we interact together? What do we do together before and after the LARP? How do we support each other if somebody's in trouble and so on? If you don't put any effort into that, you're going to end up with people just bringing the worst. And if you're also a hardcore gamer on the digital side, I mean, you'd be surprised. I've spoken, also occasionally get to work with digital games companies, and on the AAA level, they're quite surprised because it's a very new thing for them. Certainly 7 or 8 years ago, it was a very new idea for them, this idea that they could influence the society, the community of their players. But especially if you're in the business of campaigns or expansions, right? If you have a returning customer base and a player community around your product, whatever it is, then you are in the business of relationships. That means you're in the business of community design. And you have to take the responsibility for that, because if you don't design it, your players will design it. And if your players come from many different backgrounds, or if they come from a social environment that has toxic traditions, they're not going to bring their best self necessarily. So that's very important, right? So to be able to enable people to play whatever they really truly want inside the fictional society, you have to put a lot of effort into the temporary society. But what is possible and what is not possible also, I think, inside that is of course a function of the fact that we are living inside a continuous society, which is the society in which we live every day. And whenever you do anything, you change the world, right? And certainly when you allow people for a moment to experience some other kind of reality, whether it's worse or whether it's better than the real world, you change their ideas of what is possible in the real world as well. Now, I like to think that PDA is, in particular in our own work, we're specialized in games where the fictional society is horrible, but the temporary society is wonderful. Players will come out of LARPs where their characters have been the most evil, disgusting people who have done terrible, terrible things, especially in Inside Hamlet, which is about a dictatorship. You can only imagine how terrible it is. But they also say, at the same time, I felt safe. I always felt like I was safe. I was always respected and so on. Not 100%, we don't get 100%, but we do follow up. And I want to say our numbers are among the best I've ever seen. And our players do tend, even the very darkest journeys that you can go on in some of these LARPs. BAPHOMET, of course, if you know that LARP, is a very clear example of that. The players say, it's so strange because the world was so awful. Demonic possession is terrible. So that's what the LARP is about. But even when the darkest things were happening, I always felt that I was in a group of people who will uphold me. When you allow people to be safe, like Bianca said in the film at the beginning, that's what allows them to be brave. So if you want to make edgy content, don't be an edgelord, like be the safest you can be. And that is how you will unlock people's possibility to really push themselves and really tell very true and very scary stories, because the truth, of course, is most terrifying of all. Eleanor described Nordic LARP in a different way. She said that these are the three core elements of Nordic LARP: equality of outcome, which means everybody is allowed, like if the design is any good, every participant should be guaranteed as good an experience. That is the goal. We don't always succeed, but that's what we try for. We play for story, which is to say we don't play competitively. So we're there for the interesting story, not for achieving the character's goals. And then the play is collective rather than competitive. And that, of course, is what enables us to go for the stories. We're there to experience the most interesting outcome, not the one that is most important for the character. And what we learned at PDA is that creating true participation has real business value. If you can make a LARP where people feel seen and validated and powerful and strong and maybe attractive and like they can take decisions and be listened to, or where they can be very weak and humble and have terrible experiences and be humiliated, whatever it is. If you're able to make places where they are safe to enter those spaces, participate in them fully, learn something and exit transformed ideally, then you can apply all of those exact same skills also in the real world. And we have a sign on the wall in our office that says the opposite of design is tradition. Many LARPs are made in traditions. And in some ways, Nordic LARP also is a tradition. I'm fully aware of this. But that is a tradition where the tradition is to always question, to always say, oh, we did this last time. Okay, let's do the opposite and see what happens. Or like, what would happen? What if, oh, how could we achieve this? How could we be permitted to be in the European Parliament? Or how could we take a bunch of American vampire players who have never touched each other because it is not permitted in their rules? That's the first rule. How do we get them to feel comfortable biting each other's necks or pretend making out, perhaps even really making out after just 4 hours of workshop? Is it possible? Yes, it is possible if you question tradition. But traditions are there for really good reasons. A lot of our traditions are wonderful and produce great work, and we should absolutely continue them. Just don't take them for granted, because a lot of problems, a lot of design choices that we're solving some other society's problems or some other aesthetics goals. And maybe those choices, those design choices, those ways of making LARP may not be serving you anymore. And if you become good at that in LARP, you will become good at that in everything that you can do for your customers as a professional consultant as well. I will end here. Thank you very much. It's very strange to speak out into the webcam like this, even after this whole year. Let's see if anyone has any questions.
All right. And Emma, have you transitioned back? Yeah. All right. This was an amazing presentation. First off, the video was great, and I cannot wait to share this video with the friends and family who sometimes have a hard time understanding LARP and the value of LARP and how it works.
The video guy, yeah.
Yeah, the video guy here.
You have a new fanboy.
The video was made by an American company that is great. You can find the video on Vimeo, actually, so there's a shareable link. If you just Google Larp Peterson, I think you'll just on Vimeo, or if you go on Vimeo and just write Larp Peterson, I think you'll get it up there. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
For the LARP design book, by the way, I just during the presentation I wrote Tara from Zauberfeder Verlag a letter. Send us 10 copies, please.
Great. He's gonna like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's sold surprisingly well in Germany. It's also not available almost anywhere right now because Corona, take over, and it was difficult for me to solve it. So right now, Germany is very privileged in that you can actually buy this book.
Yeah, exactly.
There is not an ebook yet. People always ask, but we're hoping to get one out next year.
Okay, cool. Just there was a question in the chat. Where can we get this book? You can get it at zauberfeder.de. The Tara from Zauberfeder Verlag, they are selling it. You can buy it in their regular online store. And you will also be able to buy it at deinlarpshop.de, which is our store in Germany. And I think everybody who wants to design a LARP should have it on the bookshelf, and even people who will not design a LARP probably should have it on the bookshelf, because obviously there is some really good input here.
People, if you make any kind of experience, like if you make parties, certainly if you make immersive theater, something like that, it's useful. But I think it's also just because we've been talking about these design things for decades literally now, and it really sums up a lot of the existing knowledge, so you don't have to start from scratch, so that you can just read it and be like, oh yeah, no, of course I know, now I have words and concepts for how to think about this stuff. Now of course I can do it. And what I was talking about today is like very woo-woo high level. Like that book is much more practical. This is how you can think about physical distances in your LARP, like on that level as well.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic.
Cool. To the chat, are there any questions for Johanna? Please speak now, or be quiet
forever. Hold your peace.
or never hold your peace. This is the internet. Use Twitter.
Yeah, I can see a question in the chat.
Yeah.
Do you have recommendation for best practice tools to start this process, to think about moderation and management of the community? Yes, and actually there are some lectures also online where if you Google my name and LARP, probably you're just gonna go on YouTube and look for it. There's a ton of things there, and the book also has a fair amount. And in fact, there's if you Google my name plus the words Japanese Journal of Analog Role Playing, you will find a very long article where I walk through all the bases of what is sometimes called safety design. But I think in any kind of experience design process, you have to ask yourself, what kinds of activities, that is, what are the verbs? Like, what will my participants actually be doing in this LARP? If you can't answer those questions, your LARP design is terrible. So you have to be, and also if it's just like sitting and listening, probably also it's not a very exciting LARP. So there have to be some verbs, there have to be some things that they have to do. And then you think, what would it take for people to be able to do it? Like how is the LARP, does the LARP need to be structured? but also what would it take for people to get to a place where they feel like they can do the activities. Sometimes it's like it can't be too cold or it can't be too hot. If you would want to make a LARP, for instance, where people take their clothes off to do, I don't know, like something, it could be something sensual, but it could also be something ritual, for instance. They're not going to be able to do that if the room is really cold. They will resist it to the end. And that sounds like a really trivial problem, but because we've run Hamlet very many times, I can tell you for a fact that is a practical thing that really affects it. But then you have to spend a lot of time thinking about your tone, like how do we speak consistently to the participants before and after. And the cardinal sin is yelling at your participants. So many organizers are very stressed. So many LARP makers don't get paid, and then we get paid sort of in social attention, and maybe we are martyrs in a lot of LARP communities. It's like the more you suffer to make the LARP, the less you have slept, the more high status you are. And then because you haven't slept,
That is so true.
you're an asshole to your participants on site. And just like, don't do that. That is completely counterproductive. Like that is not helping you achieve any of your goals, and it makes you look like an asshat. So like, let's just not do that. When you arrive at Inside Hamlet, Bianca, who is the lead designer on that piece, is going to stand down in the castle courtyard, being very calm and welcoming you, and that is there to show that we are ready. Like we're not solving shit last minute. Sometimes we are, but the players don't need to know that, because the most high status person on the team is standing there being completely calm, saying, "Hey, come here," and and to make sure, do people know where to go? Do they know what they're supposed to be doing at this time? Do they have time to prepare? If you take their stress levels down, they will also be nicer to each other. So it's a lot of these like incredibly basic things, and just thinking through it almost like you would a user journey of a customer is a good idea. Yeah.
All right. Any other questions?
Maybe that's
chat?
it.
Yeah.
I'll try to post some links in the chat, especially for that long article that covers just like the basics of how to do this sort of safety and participation thinking for LARPs. I'll make sure to do that directly.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I don't know if you can though in the chat. You can
send
give
them to me, and then I will put them in there for you.
Send them to Tom.
I mean, I am secretly also watching the stream, so I'm meaning on Twitch. I could probably do that, right?
Yeah.
I think we have it set so you can't post links as
Yeah.
it doesn't matter. We will sort it out so that the links end up.
I'll send it to you. So you can That's a good idea. Yeah.
Exactly.
Good practice. Yeah.
All right, Johanna,
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. This was this is one of the coolest days I've had in a long time of really learning a lot and getting a chance to listen to people who are so knowledgeable on these topics. And thank you so much for being part of it. And I know that we would love to have you visit SKALD TV in the future to continue these discussions.
I would absolutely love to. Do ask me. All right. Bye.
Fantastic.
Thank
Have
you.
a great one.
Bye-bye.
For all of you at home who are watching, make sure to check out Johanna's information. Check it out. Mittelpunkt.com should have more information about where you can connect with her, and pick up a copy of LARP Design, a fantastic book on the
At
subject.
zauberfeder.de.
And definitely something worth grabbing. We will be going on a short break and preparing for our next guest, next participation.
Let me look it up. Oh, Vanya with Sycamore film screening and recap. This is also a very interesting project.
And a live, we're going to be doing a live screening of the film tonight. So stick around, and I hope you'll stay with us and join, enter in the chat. Go ahead and throw questions if you have questions beforehand, so that after the screening, the Q&A can be full of all your great thoughts and ideas. Until then, which will be at 1925, I believe. Or excuse me, 1915. 1915. And 1915 we'll be jumping back in. Until then, enjoy some lo-fi music and conversation in the chat, and we'll be right back.
Bye-bye. See you.